Hello and welcome, fellow bookworms and film fans. In this week's episode, I shall be looking at The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, it was published in 1937 and it was then made into 3 films starting in 2012. Now, I will be looking at all 3 films as they do encompass just the one book. Now, I will be looking at 4 things as we normally do. So, how good the book is, how good the film is, how good the plot is, and overall how well did the film take from the book. Now, first things first is I will start with the plot as I always do. So with the plot, as I said, I am going over 3 films for one book, so there might be a little bit more content than there normally is. So the plot starts in the same way in the book as it does in the film. So Gandalf comes across Bilbo and promises him an adventure. But Bilbo isn't bothered. Obviously he's a Baggins, but also he's a Took. So this is why Gandalf thought that he would want adventure due to his Tookishness of his ancestors. But he still draws a sign on the door, which is a sign for all the dwarves to then pile in the next night. And they do all come a-knocking. They all come tumbling into his house. Now in the book, as the dwarfs arrive, Thorin arrives with them. And in the film, Thorin arrives after everybody's already raided the pantry and had the food. So it's sort of more like a dramatic entrance in the film, Thorin's part. In the book, he sort of tumbles in with the last of the dwarves. Now, in the book as well, they do also all have instruments, which they do play in the house. Now, the book has them explaining the situation to Bilbo as if he's already agreed to go. Whereas in the film, it's more like they're just discussing what's going to happen and they're just doing it. They just happen to be in this place that Bilbo has kitted out for them, basically. And in fact, Thorin at one point is just like he doesn't want Bilbo to come with them. Whereas in the book, he seems a lot more anxious. He's sort of like he wants Bilbo there and he feels that Bilbo would be a good addition. As I said in the film, Thorin seems to really, really dislike Bilbo. I don't blame him, but there we go. Now, the story of the dragon is slightly different in the book as it is in the film. So, in the book, the dragon comes and destroys the town and then settles in the cave under the mountain, the kingdom under the mountain. And the only reason why Thorin and a couple of dwarves escape is because they were out wandering around when the dragon comes. In the film, a sickness falls on Thorin's grandfather and he hoards gold and it becomes quite negligent to everybody else and he breaks deals with people and he hoards everything. And so because of that, this dragon is drawn to this huge pile of wealth, comes in, there's a big sort of battle, they lose, Thorin and a few people escape, and then the dragon settles and they're homeless. You also see as well in the film, they're calling for help. The elves come, but they don't help. They just sit back, which is why throughout the entire film, Thorin Oakenshield hates elves and dislikes men. In the book, he doesn't have a hatred of elves. He never really did. It's just a general sort of uneasiness, but it's not a hatred. So that's something that they definitely changed. But you also have as well the Arkenstone is quite a key point. Now in the book it does show up sort of like right towards the end almost as an afterthought. In the film it's there from like the very beginning. The Arkenstone is in the what's it called? The chair, the throne is in the throne. And Thorin believes that if you have the Arkenstone you rule. Never mind that you're the natural heir or whatever. If you have the Arkenstone you rule, and that puts a lot of pressure as you'll find out later on in the book and in the film, especially in the film. So Thorin then loses his granddad to Azog, who is in the film is an orc, but in the book he is a goblin. It's a slight difference, but you'll see why I've specified this difference in a bit. So in both, Thorin's dad ends up in the clasp of the necromancer, and he dies. Now in the book it's dealt with very early on. You hear it almost from Gandalf as he says, "This is the map. This is the key. This is how I got them. Your dad is dead." In the film, it's almost like an afterthought. So it's sort of, I think it's towards the end of the second film, and Gandalf thinks that Thorin's dad is dead, comes across him at where the necromancer is holed out, and tries to save him, but then he dies. Now, Bilbo decides not to go on the adventure in both, and he goes to bed in both, but ends up following them in the film of his own accord. In the book, Gandalf basically just pushes him out the door. So the party then comes across some trolls. Now, just before I mention the trolls, just to go back as well, Gandalf pushes him and says, they're waiting for you, you've better go. He goes out, and they end up on the adventure. In the film, it's a bit more sort of like, I'm going on an adventure. So many memes of that at the moment. And he goes off and he's running off on this adventure. And then he's like, oh, no, we must go back. I forgot my pocket hanky or whatever it is. And that's when he realises that things aren't going to be that great for him. So that was good. Now, in both the book and the film, the party do come across some trolls who we then see in Lord of the Rings Frozen. So, you know, there's that. Now, in the book, they see a light and push Bilbo. So in the darker night, they see a light and they push Bilbo to check it out. And he goes and checks it out and gets caught by the trolls. And then the dwarfs come out to try and save them. They all get captured and they almost get eaten. In the film, it's because the ponies keep disappearing. So Philly and Killy are just like, I've counted this many ponies, but now I'm counting this many ponies, and now I'm counting this many ponies. So Bilbo goes forward, finds the trolls, you know, and then he gets captured, and then the dwarfs come and save him. Now in the film as well, Bilbo comes along almost more as like a hero, because he realizes that, you know, they will turn to stone at dawn, and he realizes that that's not far away. So he plays for time and he tries to kill time, which works. But in the book, it's Gandalf. So Gandalf pretends to voice the trolls and throws his voices and get them arguing with each other. So they don't realize what time it is, and then he breaks the rock. I mean, he breaks the rock in both, but in the film, Bilbo helps him by delaying the time. In the book, it is just Gandalf. So, in the film, this is one thing I think they added in for sort of like dramatic effect, as it were. The dwarfs are constantly chased by orcs and Azog the Defiler. And that is not the case in the book in the slightest. They really are not chased by orcs at any point. They don't have that danger at all. And I will keep mentioning points where they have been chased, because it is quite a big difference. So they then end up sheltering with the elves. Now, the difference in the book and the film, in the book they end up sheltering with the elves because that's where they need to go on their journey. In the film, they're being chased by the orcs and they end up having to jump down this little hole, end up in Rivendell. Thorin feels like he's been deceived because he doesn't want to be anywhere near the elves, because, as I mentioned, he hates them. Whereas in the book, they're welcomed with open arms and they're quite happy to stay. Then in both, you've got Elrond of Rivendell, who can read moon runes and deciphers a little clue on the map as to what they need to do when they get to the kingdom under the mountain. Now, in the book, Gandalf is still with them when they encounter the storm giants. So they exit Rivendell, they've lived there for a couple of weeks. This is one major thing as well. So they don't get chased by orcs, and also they seem to stay everywhere for a very long period of time. So I think they're in Rivendell for like a good couple of weeks before they move on. Then they come across the storm giants. Now in the film, Gandalf has vanished into thin air. He does that, almost like Batman. But in the book, Gandalf is still with them. So they're travelling through the mountain. It's a lot more peaceful. They kind of realise that they're storm giants. They realise that they have to take shelter. They find a cave. They settle into it. In the film, it's a lot more sort of like edge of your seat drama, you know, action. You know, these storm giants come to life. At one point, they're on the knees of the storm giants. They have to try and all get to this safety. They almost lose Bilbo. You know, it's a lot more action-packed. Again, I think I know why they did it, because obviously they're trying to keep people's attention, but it is quite different. So then they end up in this cave, and they think it's safe and they think it's fine, but it is the mouth to a goblin. It's the entrance to a goblin cave. So in the middle of the night, it splits open, and the goblins basically take the people that are on their doorstep to eat them. I mean, why else would you be on a goblin's doorstep? So in the book, Bilbo wakes up and realizes that something's not right, so screams out. Gandalf wakes up in time, hits them with these magical stick, and kills quite a few of them and vanishes. But then they all get captured apart from Gandalf, but Bilbo gets captured as well. They go down, they get taken through, you know, they get taken to the Goblin King. He realizes that they've got elven blades that has been killed many of their kin. Then Gandalf comes and rescues them. They're sort of fighting their way out. They get ambushed by some more goblins, and Bilbo falls off into oblivion. And then we get the riddles with the Gollum, which is amazing. But there is that. In the book, that is what happens. In the film, however, so Gandalf's not with them. Bilbo realizes what's happening, but it's too late. They all get swallowed up into this cave. Bilbo manages to sort of like just duck down, and he gets almost invisible without the ring, because he doesn't have it at this point. Almost invisible, and the goblins just go past him. As he's then trying to figure out a way to save them, to save the rest of the dwarves, he comes across a goblin himself, has a fight with them, falls over, ends up in Gollum's lair, and then that's how he encounters Gollum. Now, the dwarves still get saved by Gandalf, and they go on this big adventure going through. The Goblin King dies in both of them, and they go running off and trying to save themselves. So the game of riddles between Bilbo and Gollum is about the same. It's pretty much, I mean, Bilbo comes across the ring, puts it in his pocket, doesn't even think twice about it. They're playing a game of riddles. Gollum, or Spiegel, as he was known before he was Gollum, almost loses his patience and tries to kill Bilbo, because Bilbo says, "What's in my pocket?" which is a ring. Gollum gets it wrong, then he goes off to try and find the ring, realises he's lost it, goes on a massive sort of breakdown, tries to then find Bilbo. Bilbo at this point is tripped over and the ring has fallen on his finger, and realises he's invisible, which helps. So then Gollum then inadvertently leads Bilbo to the edge and to the exit, which is what he promised to do anyway, before he tried to eat Bilbo. In the film, Bilbo then sees all of his mates run past. He leaps over Gollum and he follows them out with the ring still on. And then when they're bad-mouthing him and saying, "Oh, can't believe we've had to go back for Bilbo, can't believe we lost him, he's a ship robber, blah, blah, blah," or a ship burglar, he then takes off the ring and goes, "Here I am, you haven't lost me." In the book, he gets out of the little like underground cavern because he jumps over Gollum again. He sees this massive gate being guarded by loads of goblins. He manages to work his way through by being invisible, pops out at the gate, goes wandering for a while, can't find anyone, finally finds them, but he's gotten past one of the dwarves' guards, takes off the ring and goes, "Oh, here I am," and they go on. So, you know, there's again slight differences, but sort of they're trying to keep to the same plot. So after they're reunited, in the book, they come across wolves, and some of them are vargs, or wargs. I don't know if you say it with a V or a W. They're spelt W-A-R-G-S, but you never know in Tolkien's world. And that makes them climb up trees, and then they're rescued by eagles. Now, in the film, they're chased by, you guessed it, orcs, and the pale one. So they end up in the trees, surrounded by fire, because Gandalf is throwing pine cones down that he's lit on, but then they also get rescued by eagles. And here ends film 1. So you then come across Bjorn. Now in the film, once again, running from orcs, they shelter in Bjorn's house, and then he comes back after a night of being a bear, and Gandalf introduces them in twos and everything like that, and starts talking to them, and he accepts the help. In the book, they calmly go over, they calmly ask for help, and they stay with him for a little while. Now in both, he does give them provisions, and he warns them about the dangers of Mirkwood, which they're about to go through. And this is pretty much exactly the same. I mean, they spend a little longer in the book than they do in the film, but again, who would want to sit there and watch dwarves and a hobbit and a giant half bear, half man and a wizard frolicking and eating honey and all of that for 3 weeks? So that's completely understandable. Now, as they get to the end, as they get to Mirkwood, Gandalf tells them that he's not going any further. And he does this in the book and in the film, so that is consistent. And he doesn't go any further with them. When they get to the edge of Mirkwood, they send the ponies back to Bjorn. You don't want to make an enemy of that guy. and Gandalf vanishes, and they go into Mirkwood. Now, when they venture into Mirkwood, it transpires in the film almost within the same day. They all seem to be fine. They all seem to be getting, through the forest okay. Then they have to cross this river, which normally there was a bridge, but now there's not. So they cross over tree branches. They get a little bit wet. They start getting drowsy. They lose the path, and then they end up getting captured by spiders. In the book, it is several days that they're lost in the woods for. They also use a boat to cross the river. They also shoot a deer, and then they start getting like drowsy and everything. But also in the book, the reason they leave the path is because they're chasing some lights that they see elves surrounding by. So they see these woodland elves and they go chasing into these lights, and the lights disappear, they vanish, and then it reappears further on. So that's why they end up losing the path in the book. But in both, they become absolutely delirious and end up passing out and end up being almost eaten by spiders. So in both, as they're being swallowed up by spiders, Bilbo wakes up and realizes that something isn't right, rescues himself, defeats a spider, rescues the rest. Now, in the book, this is where he finally gets his backbone. This is the biggest thing this is the biggest problem I've had really with the book, is Bilbo is such a wuss. I mean, I love him in the films because he seems to almost have like a little small reserve, and you go, you little hobbit. But in the book, you just can't root for him. He is just unlikable right up until this point where he finally kills a spider, which, good on him, can't stand spiders myself, and kills them, and then rescues the rest of the dwarves. So this is where he finally gets his backbone. So when he finally rescues the rest of the dwarves, he then uses the ring to go off into different areas, confuses the spiders, rescues the dwarves, they go off running, and then they keep running and running and running, and they don't quite get to the edge of the forest, and they pretty much pass out because they're too exhausted to fight back. But Bilbo's still got the ring on, so when they get picked up by woodland elves, because they're exhausted and they can't go any further, they don't pick up Bilbo. So Bilbo follows the elves, and this is all in the book, by the way, follows the elves through the doors close, and Bilbo is safe inside but not locked up. In the film, it's a lot of, like, they're rescued by the woodland elves. So in the film, Bilbo kills a couple, saves the dwarves. As they're trying to escape, woodland elves come in and kill loads. And this is where we're first introduced to Toriel, I think her name is. And we see Legolas as well, which is a nice surprise. But Toriel is my biggest pet peeve with the films because they introduced her and introduced a love story between her and a dwarf for no apparent reason. It was not needed, did not like it, would rather it didn't happen. But yeah, so this is where we're first introduced to that character. So they are then saved by the woodland elves and imprisoned. But in the book, Thorin is already imprisoned by the time the rest of the woodland elves pick up the rest of the dwarves. So again, time passes differently in the book than it does in the film. The rescue of the dwarves in the film by Bilbo seems almost the same day, if not a couple of days later. In the book, it appears to be weeks while he's trying to figure it out, how it's going to work, how he's going to rescue them. But they do escape in barrels. They do that in both. In the film, however, they are spotted. And as they reach the stream, you've got orcs on one side. There they are again, those pesky little orcs. Orcs on one side trying to get them back. You've got elves on the other side trying to get them back. And they're sort of stuck in the middle going down this river. In the book, no one notices. They get let out into the river. They bob down. No one cares. No one notices. At the end of the barrel sequence in the film, Fili has been struck by an arrow from an orc, which means that he is now poisoned. But they now end up bartering with a man called Bard, who is of Lake Town, for safe passage into the town. In the book, however, Bilbo sneaks off once they've come to a stop and steals around, takes some food and everything. And then some elves push off with the raft with the dwarves in the barrels, and they go into Lake Town. So there's no bartering, nothing like that. There's no smuggling in that respect. They're just already in the barrels. So in the film, once they get to Lake Town, they're then smuggled into a house, told not to show their faces. They eventually get found out by the master and then welcomed because they tell them that they'll be able to get them gold and everything by returning to under the mountain. But it is more due to pressure that the master he is a slimy little Can't really swear, but he's a slimy person in the book and in the film, to be perfectly honest. But then the hobbits do move on, but they do leave 3 people behind. So the dwarves do move on, and they leave 3 dwarves behind. 1 of illness, which is Philly. 1 because it's Killy. Is Killy or Philly? I can never tell those 2 apart. Killy, I think, is poisoned. Philly is the brother that stays behind to help him. And then 1 of the dwarves, not a chance with the name, gets left behind because he overslept. Now, in the book, they arrive, they spill out of the barrels, they're pampered, they're welcomed with open arms, and after about 3 weeks of this, they then decide to move on and finish their quest. And they all go together, and they're all given a ton of provisions to do that. So again, the film, they find the door, and then Bilbo figures out the map and calls the dwarfs back, because they find the door, the last lights of Doran's Day is going, and nothing happens, so the dwarves get really upset, they leave. Bilbo goes, hang a minute, wait, that's not the last light of Doran's Day. This is the last light of Doran's Day. Waits, the moonlight opens up the door, they get called back, they're super excited. In the book, again, time seems to pass differently because it takes rather a few days of them sitting around doing nothing before Bilbo finds it out. So in the film, Bilbo is sent in to find the Arkenstone for Thorin. That is the main reason he's brought in. And while doing so, he wakes the dragon, who then converses with him. But in the book, he's just sent in to get the lay of the land, as it were. He takes a cup to prove that the treasure is there, and because of that, Smaug realises that something has gone missing and wakes up. Now, you also get in the film, flashing back to Lake Town, because you've still got the 3 dwarves that are left there. They get attacked by, you guessed it, orcs. But they are saved by elves, one of whom has a thing for Killy, so it is Killy that got poisoned. Toriel. And, you know, so in the film, the dwarves that stayed behind get saved by elves, and, you know, there's a little thing going between Killy and Toriel. So in the film as well, all the dwarves then ventured into the caves with Bilbo and end up taking on the dragon, and the dragon then flies off into the night. In the book, Smaug leaves, tries to find them, fails, comes back into the cave. They all then try and think of a plan while Bilbo goes into the cave for a conversation with Smaug. Enrages him, then Smaug flies off to Lake Town, and we finally hear of the Arkenstone. So with Smaug flying off into the night, that is the end of film 2. Now we come to film 3. So in both, Bilbo finds and pockets the Arkenstone. In the film, we know that it's a really big thing and it is going to be a confrontation, but in the book, we don't quite realise how big it's going to be, this confrontation for the Arkenstone. So in both, Smaug attacks Lake Town. Now in the film, the party of dwarves and Bilbo know this, they see it happen, they see Smaug die, and they realise that they have the other cause. Now Bilbo feels regret, the dwarves, some of them care, but Thorin kind of turns his back on them. In the book, however, they don't see it, they don't know about it, and they hear about his death from birds that come and tell them the truth. So although Bard has a bigger part in the film, as he is the one that smuggled in the dwarves and looks after them, in both, he is the one that kills the dragon. He does it in both. In the film, he knows of a legend of, you know, this missing piece in this dragon that kills it. In the book, he's told by a bird that there's a missing piece, that he can shoot the dragon and kill it, which is quite nice, I think. So in the film as well, after Smaug has been killed and the town is destroyed, Lake Town is destroyed, everybody then goes and makes their way to Dale, to the city of Dale. Then the elves appear, they offer their aid, they then combined, prepare to march from Dale to the mountain. But in the book, they leave the sick and the wounded on the shore, and only the fit and the healthy go off to Dale, and they do so with the elves, because the elves then do bring aid still to the people, to the men, basically. So in both, Thorin becomes enchanted by the gold, ends up refusing to parley with anybody, refusing to help those that have helped him. And this caused the dwarves and Bilbo to become besieged. Now, Bilbo obviously realises that this cannot go on and does not want a war. Some of the dwarves are more sort of like, well, this is our birthright, we shouldn't be giving it up. But they start becoming a little chagrined towards the end, and they realise that maybe Thorin isn't all there, really, as it were. So, in both, we now see the lust for the Arkenstone, and we see it in Thorin, and Bilbo becomes afraid because he has it. So in both, Bilbo escapes under cover of darkness, goes to the elves in the men's camp and gives them the Arkenstone and says, if you use this, you can get what is owed to you. I will use it as my claim of the dragon's share, and you can get what is owed to you and continue, and you won't have to go to war. He then returns back to the mountain, and in both, Thorin then finds out, obviously, because when they come the next day with the Arkenstone, Thorin then finds out that he's been betrayed by Bilbo. So he kicks Bilbo out and pretty much wants to kill him, but will be nice and go, okay, nope, you're gone. So he's also waiting for the dwarf army to come and back him up. So Thorin is now going to start a war with men and elves because he's a little bit crazy. So it is goblins in the book, but orcs in the film, which is headed by Azog the Defiler. But they are now advancing as well. So the men, the dwarves, and the elves form an uneasy alliance. And the slight difference in the film are there are civilians in Dale who get attacked by orcs. In the book, there are not. In the film, Thorin is reluctant to actually go out and fight, but ends up being swayed eventually by his companions. In the book, he just bursts out because he realises it's the right thing to do. Now, in the book, Bilbo gets knocked out by a rock, so we don't see the battle, but we later hear of the Eagles joining, and then Bjorn joining, and then the tide is turning. In the film, it is in great detail that we see everything. So in both, Bilbo comes back to the selling of his stuff, and the film ends after many years with him writing his book and Gandalf visiting. The book ends, however, after many years with him writing his book, but with Gandalf and Balin, the dwarf, visiting him. So the plot is very different. It does keep some of the bigger components of what the company and Thorin endure. The film also added Radagast as a character, which we don't really see in there, and Toriel, who is an elf, who ends up in love with Philly. Nope, Killy. Must get those two right. Oh, I forgot to say, in both, Thorin, Philly, and Killy all do perish, unfortunately. So that's a little bit... I mean, that got me a bit in the book, I'm not going to lie. In the film, I was kind of like, they're getting on my nerves now. So they also added orcs constantly chasing the party. And the film somehow managed to make one book into 3 films because they added so much. So as much as I enjoyed both the narratives, they are quite different, and it did try to keep the major points. So I think it gets a 5 out of 10 for me. Now, in regards to the film, I do enjoy a good fantasy just as much as I enjoy a whodunit and a animated, you know, like a kids film and spy film. And, you know, I'm quite eclectic. Not westerns, though. Not a fan of westerns. Probably upset a lot of people with that comment, but that's fine. The only thing I did not enjoy is the battle scene, because it's mostly the entirety of the last film, and I'm not a big battle kind of person to watch it. And the bizarre love interest they inserted into the film between a dwarf and an elf, I felt it was unnecessary, didn't like it. However, I did enjoy pretty much all the rest of it. I loved how they portrayed Bilbo as a spine, with a spine, basically. I loved the game of riddles between Bilbo and Gollum. And the initial scene where all the dwarves are in Bilbo's house made me smile, because his reaction would be my reaction. And it's probably my reaction still now. In fact, I love Martin Freeman as Bilbo. He is a fantastic actor, and I loved him as Bilbo. So as long as me and Michael, you know, the films themselves are a little long because me and Michael only watch the, well, I say me and Michael insists we only watch the extended editions. But they are a good watch, and I would recommend the films. I do like the film series, and it is a good way to kill a good couple of hours each day. So the film series altogether, I think, gets a 7 out of 10 for me. Now, the book, I very much enjoyed the book. It is a nice children's story. It has everything you want. It has dragons, adventures, elves, wizards, shapeshifters. I enjoyed the narrative. I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the ending, and I would recommend this book highly to absolutely anybody. I would give this an 8 out of 10. Now, overall, Bilbo seems more of a wuss in the book than he does in the film, as I've mentioned before, which is a shame. They changed the narrative quite a bit. They added characters into the films that they shouldn't. They did miss out a couple of plot points. They also added the orcs, chasing them constantly. So they because of all of this, I will give it overall, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. I think it did rather well, to be fair, but it did sort of, because of the fact that it made one book into 3 films, I think it did add a lot of things that just didn't need to be added. This is, of course, my own opinion. I'm more than happy to discuss it. If you disagree or agree, leave in the comments below. Please do subscribe to my channel so then you can be alerted whenever a new video comes out. If there's any book to film adaptations you'd like me to have a look at, do leave it below in the comments or send me a message, or check me out on Instagram, Contented Narrative. Drop me a message there. That's absolutely fine. So don't forget to join me next time for the Contented Narrative around The Great Gatsby. So excited to do this one. But until then, please do remember that you can always keep it contento.